Hello everyone, my name is Bill and I'm going to be posting this on my Instagram, a link to my YouTube channel, and I thought for this video I would just edit some Adobe Lightroom photos and show everyone how I process a photo as I'm editing it, what I'm thinking about, how I bring out certain colors and whatnot, and hopefully this gives you a better idea when you are editing Lightroom photos, or maybe tells you something that you were not previously thinking about when you are editing photos. So let's get into it. All right, everyone, I have my 6 images right here. So I've got the BMW 335i I did a shoot with. This is the Chicago skyline right here. I have a BMW M6 in a snowy forest that I shot. And then I have my car that I shot next to this wedding venue near my house. So these are all pretty similar overcast days, so there's not going to be a ton of variety, but of course I wanted to shoot recent photos that are taken by me, and it is currently winter, so we are going to get into this first image. So obviously you can see these images look a little bit different, so I'll first start with my main light adjustments here. So I always like to just take back my highlights and see exactly what I'm working with detail wise. Now typically you'd also do that on like a sunny day, however, since this is an overcast day, there's not a ton of detail that's being hidden by dragging down your highlights. So I will drag them down a little bit just to take out maybe some of the brightness in the sky for now. That's not going to be the final look. And then obviously the headlights might be a little bright, and I might want to take them down. As you can see, there's a little bit of detail there, but nothing abnormal. This was shot at 1/80 at f2.0, f2.8 and 100 ISO. So pretty normal settings, pretty overcast day, really great day for car photography. Probably my favorite time to shoot, just because of the consistency you can get. And I always like to bring up my shadows a little bit. And this is sort of my signature style of just a clean look. I like everything to look very realistic, yet still artistically pleasing to the eye. And then as I bring up my shadows a little bit, I'll bring them to 20 or 30 just to make the car pop. Obviously you don't want to bring it up too much, and we will be adjusting this shadow later on in different parts of Lightroom, so I won't bring it up too high, but I'll bring it up a little bit just to bring an overall pop to the image. However, I do notice that when I bring out my shadows, it tends to decontrast the image because you're making the image lighter essentially. So what I like to do is, while I do like to make it pop, I like to bring back some of that darkness, and that's through the contrast. And you can see that kind of evened it out a little bit. It didn't do too much to the image once I've upped that contrast, but I always like to do that, and I think it makes the difference. Okay, next moving to my whites and blacks. Typically for the whites, I like to make sure my image is properly exposed. I just do it by my eye. I use a very color accurate monitor when I'm editing too. So that's always a big thing. Make sure your brightness is in check on the monitor you're editing with. If you don't have a monitor and you're just using Lightroom mobile, that's totally okay, because if you're using like an iPhone, for example, that is extremely color accurate. A lot of times I'll actually take photos, upload them, and edit them on my phone, and then apply that edit to all of the photos. So I just get a really good idea of what that image is going to look like, exposure-wise, color-wise, and everything like that. So as I up my whites here, I just like to see the sky pop. And I guess you could do that with the highlights as well. But if your image is a little overexposed, bring down the highlights and bring up your whites, at least in my opinion, helps add a little bit of a nice pop. And then for the blacks, similar to bringing back your contrast up after bringing up your shadows, taking down the blacks is going to just add a little bit of deepness in the darker parts of the image while not darkening the whole image, depending on how you edit that. And you can hold down Alt on your keyboard and that'll actually show you where you're crushing it. I really don't like to be anywhere near here if possible. I like to stay right around -15 on my blacks. However, that's all subject to change depending on the image. And then moving over to the curve here, just moving down, and I don't really do these in a particular order, just kind of as I see them. I'll pop up my highlights and bring down my blacks. Similar style to what I had on the light adjustments. Now you'll notice the front of the car is getting kind of dark. We will address that later. We're not going to deal with that now though, because if I were to bring up these adjustments, it would be affecting the whole image. So now moving over to white balance. What do I like to do with white balance? I really like to essentially create just a nice middle point of what true white would be. Nothing too offensive. So if I want a cool image or a warm image, I personally do not change the white balance around. You can change your white balance and make the image look a little bit more, say, cool, warm, up to you. But I will change this later on in a different part of the Lightroom app. So I'll usually just keep this right at where it's at, assuming I shot it correctly. Just use your eye, make sure it all looks correct. One thing you can do is when you're shooting, just go through all of your different white balance settings on your camera and see which one just naturally looks most similar to what you're seeing when you're shooting. Because at least with raw photos, white balance is not a huge deal. You can change it after the fact, but this just helps you get a jump start on your edits. And then moving over to tint, I really don't adjust tint that much unless I'm messing with the temperature, and these two things sort of build off of each other. So if you go really warm or really cold, you're going to change your tint. And then for vibrance and saturation, I will usually come back to these later. So I won't mess with those right now. We may or may not come back to them later. Here are my color wheels, or color mixer, I should say, not color wheels. Car is blue, so I might pop up that saturation a little bit. But again, still looking very dark. So what I will do now is I'm going to go over here to the masks and select a subject mask. And what this will essentially do is just select the car. Pretty straightforward, assuming it does a good job. It has a little bit of the background in there, but I'm not going to worry about that. So I'll bring my shadows up, and I'm pretty particular as I don't want the shadows to look like that, where the car's way too blown out. I would much rather bring values to different areas as much as I can and make it look like I didn't do anything at all and just look like it was a perfect photo rather than make it look overly edited. So what I'll do here, honestly, is I'll probably pop this up to about 20. And again, you can do the same thing where you up the contrast a little bit to counteract the lighter colors that the shadow brings out if you want to. But what I have honestly been doing, and I really like, is taking a radial gradient and going on the part of the car that was the darkest, which was the front here. And it makes sense because I would imagine the sun and all the light is somewhere behind the car here. So I can take this right here, and I like to set the feather all the way down, and then I can go right here, and this, we're on a whole new tab. I can just up the radial gradient, and it might look like, oh, you're upping the shadows here, but I guarantee you anyone looking at this image is just going to see a properly exposed car. They're not going to see your radial gradient popping out or anything. So you can expose the front of the car by just adding some shadows, and that really looks great. It makes, you know, what was a dark front end into a little bit brighter, and you can even up the exposure. Now less is definitely more with this. If you do like 0.8, that's enough. 0.08. And then you can even, if you want to, up this inner circle here just to make it extend across the full car. And I might even make that a little lower. Okay, moving on to my, let's see here, moving on to my other mask I always like to do is the linear gradient. I'll essentially drag this across the image like that, and what I want to do is essentially darken the bottom of the image to bring the viewer's eyes to the car. And now this is a technique a lot of people use. I learned this specifically from Life Through Optics on Instagram. That is mainly where I found a lot of editing information. And if you want to, you can select to subtract the mask, or use a subtract from mask and select the subject. And what that will essentially do is take away the car. And as you can see, that's what it did here. Took away the car. So that's something to think about. Sometimes you might not want to take away from the car, assuming it is way too harsh. So let me take this down. And then I also like to go to my clarity and just add 80 all the time. And essentially what that does is sort of make the ground really sharp. And then I'll bring back my exposure just to dial it in. So essentially when you add a higher clarity of 80, it always brightens the image by a certain amount. So I like to go in and kind of darken the image, and what that will do is, or darken the linear gradient, what that will do is counteract the overall clarity and just make it super sharp on the bottom of the image, but then also bring in the viewer's eyes. And then I'll also go into my object selection here, and this is a great tool for selecting certain parts of the car. You can select the wheels, and I just like to select the inner part of the wheels, the metal. And like I was decreasing the highlights a little bit, that might have darkened the wheels, especially if they're silver wheels, like on my car. My black BMW 335i that has silver wheels. Anytime you decrease the highlights, it's going to make it super dark. So just adding those highlights back, it'll pop. Now, because this is a bronze car, or bronze wheels on this car, you could even add a little bit of exposure or highlights and just really make the wheels pop. I almost did a little too much there, but that looks really good. So honestly, from a point of how the image is looking now, looks really good. I might just bring back my highlights a little bit, make the sky pop a little bit more. Obviously not too much, maybe even up the exposure a little bit just to give it like a nice pop, and then bring the highlights down. And then lastly, what I'll do is, well, two things. So I'll usually go into texture and add some texture. This just kind of gives a cleaner, sharper look to the car as well. And then clarity, it really depends. If you're shooting a nature scene, you might want to decrease clarity. But if you're shooting something like buildings here, just making it pop a little bit will give it a sharper look. Either way, kind of doesn't look great for me, at least right now. So I'll just kind of leave it where it is. And then dehaze, I like to push that either way, just see how it looks. I like a little bit of dehaze on there. It was a pretty hazy day, so maybe throwing on a little bit of dehaze just will make everything look a little bit more complete. And then lastly, like I was talking about with the certain look you're trying to achieve and how you do not want to use white balance, what I would recommend honestly is to go over to your color grading wheels here. And these allow you to essentially push the image a certain way and really find a certain color profile that you want to push the image. So I like to bump the shadows up to a saturation of about 9, 10, which is that S right there. And then you can essentially go anywhere here and change your colors. Now it's a very blue scene, and really you usually want to apply this color grading profile to all of the images the same way if they're all shot outdoors, but your shadows should have a nice blue, and then your highlights can have a nice little yellow in there, kind of like the sun. Now you can push it just certain ways, see what you like the most. Obviously, if you want it more of a lighter yellow or a darker yellow, you can do that here. I'll honestly just stick it right in the middle there. And then you have balance. Oh, and then I also set my saturation for 10 on the highlights. For your balance, this kind of just determines how you want to push the image overall. because even though you set those points of having the highlights in the yellow, which is like the sunny parts of the image, the brighter parts of the image, and the darker parts in the blue, you can still push the image all the way to the blue or push it all the way to the yellow. For this image, it looks very much blue, so I wouldn't really push it warm because that's going to just not look that great with the blue car. It's winter time, so I'll push it a little bit to the blue. Now I don't ever want to go too much just because I don't like the way that looks personally, so I'll go like -31 there. And then one more thing I'll do is I'll use generative AI just to clean up the image here. Makes it super easy, or you could use just the normal remove tool. Generative AI just makes it a little bit faster, and as long as you're not removing too much, it shouldn't give an AI look. I do know a lot of people go and remove every little speck with generative AI, every little piece of dirt and dust in the ground, and that can get a little extreme and can look very fake. So like all these little specks I wouldn't remove. If I am going to remove little specks, maybe I'll go in and just not use generative AI because it will remove itself a little bit faster and then create more imperfections and variations. And then if there's any blemishes in the car, just zoom in and remove those and whatnot. But generally this is how I would edit my first image. And I would say this looks pretty similar for the most part. Everything has a nice pop and the colors definitely look a lot better. So let's move into the second image. All right, here is the M6 photo. This is our second photo for today. So as you can see, here's the final image, and then here is our base image. So fun fact, when I was shooting this image, I was shooting with a variable ND because I was a little too lazy to take it off, and a lot of my photos got blurry because I just had a lower shutter speed and I really wasn't thinking about it. This photo, however, did not. It looks very sharp, which is great. So we're going to edit this today. Now, honestly, from what I've shot in the past, this is one of my first shoots with this new camera, the Lumix S5 Mark II, which is what I'm recording this on. I usually never expose for the highlights. That's normally like a Sony thing about exposing for the highlights, because I originally shot on a Canon M50. With the Canon M50, you really want to expose right in the middle. I found that the dynamic range was great on that camera for the price, but again, shooting for highlights, you really want to, instead of shooting for highlights, you really wanted to shoot in the middle there when you're exposing your image. Here I most definitely exposed for the highlights, which is great though, because you know, when you have a snowy scene like this, things can get blown out easily, especially if you're shooting on a full frame camera. You know, a fast aperture of like f2.8, you can easily blow out your image if you're not shooting at the correct settings. Luckily here, we can see the brightest part of the image though is our headlights, so not a huge issue there. So what I'll do first, and I didn't do this on the first image just because it looked pretty good already, is I'll crop this right here, and then I will auto rotate to straighten, and that did a really good job. Sometimes it will freak out though, and you might have to correct it manually, but luckily it did not. And I always like to set my car on this first line right here, a little bit higher, sometimes a little bit lower, depending on how I'm feeling. But I really like this because it just gives it a very natural look, right? As you walk around and you see everything around you, you really don't see, you're really not looking down at the ground. So a lot of beginner photographers I know will shoot like this. And for me, like, that's okay. But when you start creeping into that territory of, you know, shooting like this, it just looks a little off, because no one would really be looking at the ground like that as they see a car. And you obviously want to see the beautiful environment that's behind the car and not the ground, right? So pick your head up and stop, you know, cropping for the ground. So I like to just crop mine there. And then moving into this image, again, editing is really a case-by-case situation. So on an overexposed image, I would not edit how I'm editing. but because this is an underexposed image for sure, we can easily go in and add some exposure here, pop up our image, highlights again. Probably won't even touch them, to be honest, because the white is kind of throwing off the highlights, so it's making basically the highlights into like a mid-tones adjustment tool. So I'll do that. Now this is a matte white paint. This is a frozen white metallic, I think. So this is going to act a little bit differently when you do edit with it, because it's not going to be as reflective. You're never really going to be able to push out those shadows, that glossiness that you saw in the last image. As you see, if I crank up the shadows, you're not getting anything out of that paint. So don't worry about that when you're shooting these different types of cars. So I am going to just add the shadows and add the contrast as I did in the last image. For the whites, I'm definitely going to pop these up. And then as I pop up these whites to bring out a little bit of a brighter image, the headlights that I did expose for do get a little brighter, so I might turn that down now, whereas before I didn't. For the blacks, I'm actually going to pop this up a little bit, and my reason for doing that is because if I decrease it, I just feel like, sure, it's adding some darkness in the car, but some of the car is getting a little too dark, and because I did expose so low, and some of the background, especially those trees, which we will address later, is getting a little too dark. So I will expose this right at about +6, I'm thinking. Nothing too crazy. I'll go over to my S-curve, or my curve here, and I'll add an S-curve. Pretty straightforward. And here I will dial in my shadows to be a little bit lower and just make this S-curve. And to control that, essentially you drag these dots diagonally. So I can bring my shadows up, which is this bottom curve. I have my middle dot here, which is the midtones, and then I have my highlights, which right here is the top. So this is looking good already. Again, I'm not going to touch white balance too much. I might bring it down just a smidge because I really don't like warm snow. Vibrance, saturation, not going to touch those. I might take out a little bit of blues. What I like to do sometimes is bring the saturation up on a certain color to see how it affects the image, because if I bring the saturation all the way up, then I know if that color is hidden somewhere. That's really good for taking out yellows and oranges and greens that you might not want in your image and that might give a uglier look. So by taking the saturation bar on your color mixer and bringing it all the way up, you can see really what's under the surface of your image. And I can see there's some blue in the windshield. There's obviously blue in the BMW badge, so I might just take it down a smidge. Now, you never want to take down your saturation too much, because then what you're going to get is some unrealistic colors, like a black and white BMW badge. So by bringing it down just a little bit, you'll take the edge off the blue in the windshield, and you'll get that a lot on like a summer day, but you'll still keep like a blue, like a realistic blue in your BMW logo. And then let's see here, moving on to the effects. Again, I'll go in with the texture at 20, which I really like to do. Clarity, you can go either way with this because it's again, I expose so low, adding a little bit of clarity darkens it. I don't really want to darken it, so I'll decrease it. And with like a forest and snow, maybe taking away some of the clarity will kind of fog up the image, which is always great. And then same with dehaze. Honestly, I kind of like the sharpness dehaze is giving. I was going to take away some dehaze, but again, just playing with the slider, it gives it a little bit of a sharper look without being too overbearing. And maybe to counteract, I'll take a little bit more clarity out. So that looks good to me. Moving over to our subject mask and our linear mask, I'll do the same thing I did in the last photo. I'll just pop up my shadows a little bit. As you can see, it brings out some of the dark plastic parts in the glass, which looks really good. It doesn't really bring out much of the car paint as well. Not much you can do to fix that, but that's totally okay. And then let me put this right here, bring up my shadows on the front of the car. And that looks pretty good to me. And then what I can also do is bring in a linear gradient. Now you don't want to go too heavy with the linear gradient here. Reason being, it's snow. So snow is going to be white at the end of the day. So you essentially want to decrease this as much as you can without it looking too dark. Because if I decrease that, like, you can tell that doesn't look good at all. So honestly, I might up my clarity a little bit more to get some more brightness and then just tone it back. And that looks pretty good. And then let me also grab my wheels here. See if I can grab that one. Oh, there was a glitch. That's a funny glitch. A lot of people talk about. Okay, I got both wheels there, and then sometimes the object tool messes up, but that's okay. These are black wheels, so I'll up the shadows, up the contrast, make them pop, but don't make them too light because you still want your black to be black. And I'll actually take out a little bit of shadow or a little bit of highlights there, just so they don't look too white as black wheels. Let's see here. What I'll also do now is take out that sign in the back. You can leave it in if you really want to. I personally take it out. I kind of want some of my images to look like stock photos in a way, rather than a like photo near you, if that makes sense, like in your area. So this is looking good already. One thing I will do now is to get more blue without tanking my white balance. I'll go over to my shadows. We'll throw in like 14 lighter blue. And then on my highlights, we can also do yellow. Now, to be honest, I don't like the yellow headlights by putting my highlights there. So maybe I'll just try a really... Let's see here where we want to go. So this is honestly affecting the whole image because the whole image is white. So for my highlights, maybe I'll do a lighter blue. Yeah, that's fine. So I'll do a lighter blue or like a teal, and then I'll just bring my balance down right there. And for me, the image is honestly looking a little dark. Maybe I've been staring at it too long. I'm not too sure. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop up my exposure a little bit. Okay, that did way too much. Okay, there we go. And then something I did do on this image is if I add a radial mask over the forest and just feather it out, I can essentially bring up some shadows. And then, let's see, take out some clarity and dehaze. And that will just give like a foggy appearance. And that really helps with, if you remember, I exposed really low. That's going to help bring out some detail, or at least some contrast to what was originally a dark scene. So this looks really good, to be honest. Definitely a little bit of a lighter edit, a little bit more blue of an edit than I did previously, but I'm happy with here to here, super happy with that. And then I could go in and take the, you know, the car if I really wanted to, but video right now. But that looks really good. Only thing I should have done is probably not shot it with an ND though. So we'll get into my third and final photo. All right, here is my third and final photo. So I actually, fun fact, shot the second photo and this photo on the same day. So after I left the photo shoot with the M6 on the way home from that shoot, I actually drove by this cool area and I thought, hey, let's post up with the snow. If you can see, there's some snow, which looks very nice. And let's grab some photos, and that I did. So we're going to edit this. I'll just edit this from the get-go, not try and match the other edit too much, but I imagine they'll look very similar. So first I'll go into my crop. And again, you don't need to do these things in any particular order. You can if you want to, but as long as you get the end, as long as you do them all, you're going to get the same end result. As you can see, I tried to do geometry there just to fix it, but that didn't work, so I'll just use the straighten tool. And I like to zoom in and just check on my car, make sure that's level, because sometimes it'll level the building in the back and not the car. This all looks pretty good though. When I was shooting, I probably should have centered the building a little bit more with the car, just because if you notice, the building continues on the right side but ends on the left. I could fix that with AI if I really wanted to, but I won't. Something that's bugging me off the get-go here is these giant lamps that look terrible, kind of like. So let me just select these with generative AI and click remove. And there we go. Straightforward. We can get into editing this, and I might set it a little bit lower there. And now we can up our shadows slightly, just to see that car pop and bring overall vibrance to the image, or an overall pop. And then I like adding my contrast as well. Because I was shooting this at 4:05 p.m. on January 18th, this was when the sun was setting. So I'm actually going to up my highlights a little bit because the sun was setting. So even though it's an overcast day, it was kind of dark. And I think I was shooting with an ND filter too. So combining all of those, you get kind of a dark sky. So by adding just a little bit of highlights, it will make the sky pop a little bit more. And then I can also go into my curve here and make an S curve, and then just really pop up that sky. The roof is white though, so you do watch out for that. Make sure it's not too bright. But this image is already looking great. Honestly, I'll up my blacks a little bit here. Again, because I was shooting sunset, it was a little darker. So just want to make sure all of the detail in the car is coming out. For my whites, probably just leave them where they are. For white balance, again, Lumix does a great job with their auto white balance, and this looks pretty spot on. For vibrance and saturation, I won't touch those. And then we can go down to our texture, 220 on the texture. Clarity, we can do like 10. Again, this is not a nature scene really. It's like a mix because you do have some snow, a tree, but then you have this building. But by adding some clarity, that should make some of the snow pop. But however, the snow is going to most likely get caught behind this white building or this lighter building. So it's not really going to pop like it does on my black car. Same with dehaze. Adding a little bit of dehaze should help bring out the car, or bring out the snow in front of the car. On the background, it's kind of going to be impossible though. And then let's see here. What I will do now is go into my mask corrections here, and we can just bring up the shadows, and you can see this does a terrible job. Shadows all the way up. It just looks really bad. So I'll bring them up a little bit to make it pop, but you definitely don't want to do too much because I've been brightening the image the whole time. So anytime you're adding more and it just looks like not even the right color, that's when you know you've gone too far. So I'll do like 10. And then what I can do also here while I'm on the car is I'll go on the wheels and select my wheels. And again, the object selector is kind of so-so, but there we go. And then I will add a little bit of exposure there, a little bit of shadows, basically bring everything collectively up to make the wheels pop. And then now what we can do is we can go over to the linear gradient. And this is a really nice pavement right here. This is a new construction building and wedding venue. So anytime you're going somewhere new, it's going to have really nice asphalt. Nothing's going to be faded. So that makes for a great ground for your car photography. So if you go and add clarity to it, it's going to look really good because it's essentially popping out this really fresh concrete. And as you can see, that looks amazing. It looks almost a little too dark here in the bottom right hand corner, and I don't like that. So what I'll do is I'll hit Control and then scroll and bring it out. And I might honestly bring it to the other side just to match it, because I don't like when you can see too much of a darkness in a certain part of the image from an edit. I like it to look like you're essentially pushing everything in the right direction without really being too visible. So keeping everything super clean and dialed in, but nothing too crazy. That's just my style though. And how you get there is totally up to you. What I'm doing may or may not be the correct way, but it's worked for me, and I've learned from people on Instagram, so ideally it should be the correct way, I hope. Something sometimes you get with these sometimes get with these snow photos is you'll get your windshield or your windows creating this really weird cast. As you can see here, it's like dark green. On some of my images before, in years past, it's been like a dark blue or something. If you do want to get rid of that, you can go over here and click this target adjustment and just click your finger on there and drag down, and it'll take it out. But again, this is affecting everything. It's not just affecting that area. So as you can see, I should bring this down a little bit, and it'll make my BMW badge a little bit less blue. But honestly, in this condition, that's fine, because there's not really much going on, so it still pops. If it was a more colorful image, maybe I would highlight the badge and then make it pop again. But this looks really good so far. Really the only thing I could think of doing now would be to add some minor color grading adjustments. We'll go with like a light blue on the shadows and put our saturation a little bit lower than normal, just because I don't want to ruin the colors in this image. They already look great. And then for my highlights, honestly, you don't want your snow and your sky to look too blue, but by pushing it up towards the green, it won't make everything look yellow. And then now I can adjust my balance slider, and this you can dial it all in. I'll just kind of push it again a little bit lower to like -30. And this image honestly looks really good. Sometimes what I'll do is just go in and clean up the front of my car. If there is any scratches or visible, obviously with the snow here, you cannot see any of that though. So that is just one thing I would lastly do on my images. But after removing those lamp posts and maybe removing anything on the ground, that is all. So here was the image I originally edited, and I'm actually liking my new edit a little bit more. I think I was like pushing the reds here for whatever reason. So I really like this color grade I did on mine. Very clean, very simple. So yeah. Lastly, what I would recommend is specific export settings. So when you're exporting for Instagram, it's going to be very different from when you're exporting for a print or you're exporting for your own social media page on your own website. So for Instagram, there's a very certain way I like to export my images, and by going over to the JPEG, making sure small, and then making sure your quality is at 90%. And selecting all of those things should give you the best results for posting to Instagram. I do know there are apps out there to edit your carousel before you post to Instagram, and those will compress it further, which is totally fine. I use one of those apps called Scroll, SCRL. I'll put a photo right over here. Essentially, Scroll will compress it from about 2 megabytes of photo, or 1 megabyte of photo in this case, to about 200 kilobytes. And that sounds like a really low amount, but that's really just compressing it even further, optimizing it for Instagram. So my workflow is typically I'll export these settings, upload them to my iCloud, which will automatically sync it on my iPhone, and then edit on Skrill or just post straight onto social media there. And that should provide the best quality. All right, everyone, that was my first tutorial. If you made it this far, thank you for watching, and comment down below what you want to see me do, whether that's edit videos, edit photos, anything else, just overall tips. I can do it all. Just let me know. This was definitely a little bit more raw of an approach. I didn't go too crazy into the editing of the video, and I kind of just wanted to make it a talking video alongside some Lightroom. And maybe my system was lagging a little bit too while I was recording, so I apologize for that if that is the case. But that will be all for today. So thank you guys all for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.